So let's discuss what resistance actually is. So resistance is the resistance to the flow of charge. So electrons, let's take a piece of metal. Electrons trying to move through a wire, and resistance is trying to stop those electrons from actually passing through. The greater the resistance, the less electrons that are able to pass through effectively. The lower the resistance, the more easier it is for the electrons to flow. So let's take a piece of gold, for example. Gold has a low resistance, whereas some other metals have a higher resistance. But gold is pretty expensive. That's why we don't really use gold wiring. So every component, be it a light bulb, a motor, has some type of resistance to it. Even wiring has a bit of resistance. That's why when we're transporting electricity, we do not like hot wires, because hot wires means that electrical energy is being wasted as heat energy, which is not great. So typically when electrical components are losing energy, it's in the form of heat. There is something known as Ohm's law, which relates voltage to current to the resistance. Now, the resistance is measured in something known as ohms. And this is the symbol of ohms. Current you know is as amps, and voltage you know is measured as volts. Now, we also know that current is voltage divided by resistance. So you have something known as resistors, which can control the current, because what a resistor does is introduces resistance to a circuit. There are even something known as variable resistors, which you turn and it could adjust the resistance, making the resistance either higher or lower. A higher resistance means you get a lower current, and a low resistance means you get a high current. And this is all assuming that you keep the voltage exactly the same. Now, this Ohm's law, which voltage is equal to current times resistance, assumes that we keep at a constant temperature. Because remember, when the temperature changes, the atoms inside the metal are going to vibrate. And that might make it tricky for the electrons to pass through, because imagine the electrons moving and the ions inside the metal are vibrating. That's going to collide with the electrons, making it difficult, making the resistance actually change with a changing temperature. That's why when we have these superconductors, usually they use nitrogen gas to make it super cold, because when it's super cold, less vibrations, makes the electrons easier to pass through. This is why some devices don't even work properly when they get too hot. So in a television where you could adjust the volume, you're actually adjusting the resistance, which affects the amount of current that is going through the loudspeakers, which means you get a different amount of volume. So the knob is actually just changing the resistance of the speakers.